Hey guys, Happy New Year. I hope your start to the year has been as strong as mine, hitting the ground running, but if not, no worries, because I will admit the first couple days were hard. If it's your first time here, I'm Jennifer, and we talk about scary, spooky, quirky, and sometimes tragic history on this channel. And today we've got a story that's so iconic, but yet so tragic at the same time. It's been turned into books, movies, one of my favorites, and sparked endless conspiracy theories. But hold on, we're not here to unhash the same old story of the unsinkable ship that hit an iceberg. Nope, we're going to dive into the eerie and bone-chilling accounts of people who claimed to see the disaster before it even happened. We're talking dreams, visions, and warnings ignored, and you're not going to believe how many people actually had a bad feeling about the trip. And we'll also be talking about some eerie facts that I found along the way during my deep dive into the Titanic's history. So grab a drink and grab a snack, because today we're traveling back to England and I guess the Atlantic Ocean in the 1900s. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's April 10th, 1912. The RMS, a luxury liner built by the White Star Line, was the biggest ship of its time. And like we've all probably seen in the movies, this thing was a floating palace. It was over 882 feet long, weighing over 46,000 tons. With state-of-the-art technology and lavish accommodations, they literally called it
the ship of dreams.
So the Titanic was designed to be unsinkable, and it had 16 compartments, and even if 4 of them flooded, it was still supposed to stay afloat. The confidence in the ship was insane. People were saying not even God could sink her. Spoiler alert, maybe don't tempt fate like that. The Titanic set sail from Southampton, England, with 2,200 passengers and the crew on board. Now, the passengers were a mix of some of the world's wealthiest people and also immigrants just hoping to start a new life in America. You had big names like John Jacob Astor, who was the richest man in the world, and Molly Brown, a socialite who later became a hero. And then there were third-class passengers who were crammed into tight quarters. So as we know, the ship set sail into Atlantic. Everything was great. The food was great. The luxury was beautiful. And the passengers were all having a great time. But beneath the surface, obviously, something was boiling. Okay, now since we set the scene, let's get into the weird stuff. So first, we have an American writer named Morgan Robertson, and 14 years before the Titanic even existed, so in 1898, he wrote a novella called Futility, or also known as The Wreck of the Titan. This book describes a massive ocean liner called the Titan that hits an iceberg and sinks in the middle of the Atlantic. Sound familiar? The Titan, like the Titanic, was supposed to be unsinkable and had too few lifeboats for its passengers. There are also similarities in size: 800 feet long for the Titan and 882 feet long for the Titanic. Same speed and life-saving equipment. And people later called Robertson's book an eerie premonition, or they called him a clairvoyant, which he denied. And that's just the beginning. There's a story about a 16-year-old girl named Jessie, whose mother was supposed to travel on the Titanic. Jessie had a vivid nightmare where she saw a massive ship sinking with people screaming and freezing in icy water. So she begged her mom not to go, and thankfully her mother canceled the trip. So first of all, at 16, I don't know if my mom would have taken me that seriously, so good for them. But also, was this her subconscious being scared for her mother about the trip, or was it an actual vision? I feel like that is kind of a crazy nightmare to have, considering how accurate it would be. Then we have a first-class passenger, William Stead. And Stead was a journalist and spiritualist who often wrote about his belief in life after death. And before boarding the Titanic, Stead told his friends that he had a weird feeling about the ship. He even wrote a fictional story years earlier about a ship sinking and passengers dying due to a lack of lifeboats. You know what? Now I have to think about it. Like, maybe they were just jinxing themselves. Like him and Robertson. It's just not a common thing to write about. Stead's eerie premonition came true, and he did not survive the disaster. All I know is if I told my friends that I had a weird feeling and they just told me not to worry and we went on the ship and it sank, I would just be giving them the stank face the whole time while the ship is sinking. I was able to find more information on this guy, and several survivors remember some of his actions before the ship sank, and it's honestly kind of incredible. First off, Lawrence Beasley, a second-class passenger, remembers Stead trying to keep everyone calm in the midst of people panicking while the ship was sinking. Then there's a stewardess, Nellie Abbott, who remembers Stead in the first-class smoking room, just reading a book, totally unbothered, and this is just moments after the iceberg hit the boat. Or the boat hit the iceberg. Maybe he just accepted his fate at that point. And then there's Colonel Archibald Gracie, who remembers Stead helping women and children, but he refused a lifeboat for himself. Ugh, unlike that guy in the movie, he was so selfless. Actually, I think that guy in the movie was the John Astor. Now, when it comes to how he actually died, there are a few theories. Some people say that they remember seeing Stead on the deck of the Titanic as the waves took it down, so he went down with the ship. Others believe he jumped into the water as the boat was sinking, so maybe hypothermia or drowning. But regardless of how he passed, Stead's legacy is that of pure sacrifice. I mean, his willingness to help others and his calmness during the disaster, which I'm sure brought comfort to a lot of people. His life and death became a testament to his principles. So fast forward, it's April 19th, 1912, and the Titanic is moving at full speed despite multiple warnings of icebergs. Captain Edward Smith was on his final voyage before his retirement, and he just decided to keep going. I mean, after all, the ship was unsinkable, right? At 11:20 p.m., disaster struck. And as we all know, an iceberg scraped all along the Titanic, tearing open 5 of its water compartments. And the unsinkable ship was doomed.
The ship will sink.
Now let's talk about the aftermath. The crew quickly realized the ship was going to sink. And remember, there were only enough lifeboats for half of its passengers. And back then, there weren't any regulations to have more. And the White Star liner thought it would look cluttered. The evacuation was chaotic. First-class passengers were given priority, while many third-class passengers were trapped below deck. And stories from survivors paint a horrifying picture. People jumping into freezing water, mothers separated from their children, and the band playing music to calm the passengers. Now, here's where it gets spookier. Survivors later reported a strange phenomena during the sinking. Some claimed to hear ghostly whispers or shadowy figures on deck, and others talked about this deep sense of dread that came over them, like they knew they weren't going to survive. One woman, Ava Hart, who was just 7 at the time, later remembers that her mother was so sick to her stomach about the voyage that she refused to sleep the whole time because she had a feeling something terrible was going to happen. Ava and her mother survived, but her father did not. And the thing is, they weren't even supposed to be on the Titanic. Originally, they had tickets for another ship, SS Philadelphia, but due to the coal strikes happening in Southampton, they were put on the Titanic instead. I mean, talk about fate stepping in. I don't know. And her mom made it a point that she didn't like that people were calling it unsinkable. She felt that that was people tempting God to prove them wrong. So instead of sleeping, she would stay wide awake, fully clothed, just anticipating something bad to happen. So on the night of April 14th, Ava was knocked out cold and her mother was up. And when the ship hit the iceberg, she just knew that something was wrong. She woke up Ava's dad and was like, you need to check this out. And he probably rolled his eyes like, ugh, fine. But he went, and when he came back, she said that he had that look on his face. You know, the one like, this is bad. Ava's dad quickly wrapped her in a blanket and they ran up to the deck where he swiftly placed her and her mother into lifeboat 14. Before they left, he held Ava's hand and said, be a good girl and hold mommy's hand. And that would be the last thing he ever said to them. He stayed behind and he sadly did not survive, and his body was never recovered. Ava and her mother were rescued the next morning by RMS Carpathia. And guess what? They they didn't stay. I mean, she never wanted to go to America in the first place, her mother. So she just turned it right around and went back to England, which is kind of sad because I'm thinking, you know, is obviously the father's wishes for them to go to America. And it's like, it's kind of like he died for nothing. And this is just a bonus story because I thought it was interesting, but the tragedy obviously scarred Ava deeply and she had nightmares about it for years. But after her mom passed in 1928, Ava decided she was done being scared and said that's enough and went and booked a ticket on another passenger ship heading to Singapore. When she got on board, she locked herself in her cabin for 4 straight days, like full on do not disturb mode until the nightmares finally stopped. And that's how she basically overcame her trauma. I mean, pretty extreme, but I guess that is one way to do it. The Titanic eventually sank in the early hours of April 15th, 1912, and over 1,500 people died out of 2,200, making it one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. The tragedy led to major changes in safety regulations, like they required more lifeboats or enough lifeboats for passengers on board, and also mandating 24/7 radio communication. But the Titanic story, I guess you could say it didn't end there. When the wreck was discovered in 1985, researchers found belongings, shoes, and dishes preserved on the ocean floor, and the ship itself resting 2 miles beneath the surface. I feel like that's so crazy. It's just like basically like a frozen time capsule. So searching for these stories, I found creepy facts about the Titanic that I wanted to include and bring to you guys. So when we think of the Titanic, I mean, it's hard not to imagine that the life vests were supposed to save people, but did you know that back then the life vests were actually made of hard materials like cork? And in the freezing waters that night, experts believe that the force of hitting the icy water could have snapped people's necks instead of keeping them afloat. I mean, I guess it was a quicker way to go, but it's just eerie to think about. And some of those vests are actually on display at the National Museum of American History, Titanic Belfast, and National Museums Liverpool. Another chilling moment took place right before the start of the journey. As Titanic was leaving, the sheer size of it created such a powerful suction that it nearly collided with one of the docked boats, the SS New York. Some on shore thought this was an omen of bad luck, but it's crazy to think that something that small could have set the course for an entirely different fate. Then, like the popular scene in the movies, there's the orchestra playing while the Titanic is sinking. Despite the chaos, the 8-member band continued to play to calm passengers as the ship sank. Their final song, often believed to be "Nearer My God to Thee," is tied to their final moments. And it's chilling to think that if you listen to the song today, you're hearing what those passengers heard during their final moments. And let's not forget about Violet Jessup, who was often called Titanic's unsinkable nurse. She survived the Titanic only to find herself on the Britannic, which also sank. She was even on the Olympic when it collided with another ship, and somehow she earned the nickname Miss Unsinkable, which is kind of badass if you think about it, but like, was the Grim Reaper after you? And she passed away many years later in a nursing home due to heart failure, not from a boat. Another fact is that some people thought the aftermath was just as scary as the sinking itself. I mean, the survivors described waiting in complete darkness and silence as they waited for rescue. I once went on a cruise with some friends, and we're all obsessed with the Titanic, so we went to go find the bow of the ship at night. And let me tell you, the darkness in the middle of the ocean is like its own thing. You know, like when you go into a dark room, let's say like the bathroom with no windows, and you turn off the light and it's pitch black, that's literally what it looked like. And then on top of that, imagine being in the water, freezing cold, not knowing what's beneath you. I mean, no one talks about that part. It's just so chilling to think about. And some passengers who didn't board the Titanic were incredibly fortunate. Milton Hershey, yes, the chocolate mogul, was supposed to be on that fateful voyage but canceled at the last minute due to business matters. If he hadn't canceled, who knows what could have happened. As the ship sank, they sent out flare signals, but tragically, nearby ships thought they were celebrating, so they didn't come to their rescue. I mean, what kind of training was put in place that they misinterpreted such a crucial distress signal? In the chaos, Titanic's final signal sent out the chilling words, "We are sinking fast." Oh, this is a crazy one. A couple years before the Titanic disaster, something strange happened. In 1910, an iceberg drifted into the Southampton harbor, the Titanic's departure point. Locals thought it was actually very unusual, and in hindsight, it seems like almost an eerie foreshadowing. That night, the ocean was a bone-chilling negative 28 degrees, cold enough to kill most people in under 15 minutes. So Jack's comment in the movie actually fits about the cold. Experts say that that kind of cold would feel like stabbing all over the body or a burning sensation. If you actually visit the Titanic Museum in Tennessee, they have a section, a part of the exhibit where they have water set to the temperature of that night. So if you touch it, you can understand how cold that is. And in the wreck's exploration, researchers found bottles of champagne still corked and intact on the ocean floor. It's like time froze underwater, and those bottles of bubbly are still waiting for someone to pop them. Finally, many survivors and their descendants have spoken of recurring dreams, ghostly sightings, and strange encounters related to the Titanic. It seems the ship's ghostly echo still lingers, haunting those connected to its tragic fate. So what do you guys think? Were they dreams and premonitions, or just coincidences? Or was there something supernatural at play? What was your favorite eerie fact? The Titanic story is a haunting mix of human error, arrogance, and possibly a touch of the unknown. Have you ever had a dream or a gut feeling that saved you from danger? Or do you think this is all just hindsight and storytelling? Either way, the Titanic remains one of the most fascinating tragedies in history. As always, if you liked the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.